Hello, Bible readers. Chapter 41 is what 39 and 40 have been preparing for. What would be Joseph's destiny in the empire of Egypt? That's been the question. This is where, in chapter 41, where the whole Joseph narrative takes a big, giant turn. That dream that Joseph had, that he would rule, now we start to see what that might look like. And there's no way anyone could have imagined the what or the how or any of the details of the plot of this story. We might simply read this Joseph story as a story about Joseph, about Jacob's sons and specifically their relationships and Joseph's journey from favorite son to castaway brother to prisoner to king's right-hand man. That's how I've usually been taught this part of Genesis. That's how I've usually read about it. But Brueggemann highlights a message in the Joseph narrative that bears so much more meaning, so much more significance than the simple plot of Joseph and his brothers. I've wondered oftentimes and been asked throughout my ministry, why do I need to care about these people like Jacob, Joseph, his brothers, Pharaoh, thousands of years after their lives and deaths? It's a similar question that people ask about history in general. Why does Alexander Hamilton matter 250 years after the Revolution? Of course, the answer is bound up in the fact that history is not about the people, the dates, or the places. I mean, it is, but the facts of history are only known in order to arrive at conclusions, lessons that hopefully inform our present challenges. The Joseph narrative is not history, so I don't mean to say that. But inasmuch as we don't really need to commit the details of Joseph's dramatic life to our memory banks, his story reveals deeply meaningful pieces of who God is, how powerful empires seem, and how powerless God can prove empires to actually be. That's the point. The Joseph story includes people, yes, from thousands of years ago, but the characters, empire, Pharaoh, God, a recipient of God's call, in this case Joseph, all those characters still exist in 2021, and they'll keep existing with different names. Chapter 41 exposes the failure of empire. That's the point. And that's a lesson that was important then and is just as important now. For all Pharaoh's power, he can't control the dream that invades his mind and dominates his imagination. All his worldly control is shown to be fragile. Kings go to great lengths to protect themselves from unwelcome messages, but this dream penetrates all the royal isolation. God comes like a thief in the night, Brueggemann says, robbing the king of his confidence, control, and finally his expected future. As Christians, we know a similar thing will happen to Herod when Jesus is born. He doesn't have adequate knowledge. He can't manage his future. And then at the end of Jesus' life, Pilate the governor brings Jesus before him. Remember in the Gospel of John? Or is Pilate in a way brought before Jesus? The inversions of power theme that begins in Genesis, and we've talked about it a number of times, is a thread that goes through all of Scripture. Pharaoh's dream has a clear message. Egypt is going to become a place of death instead of a place of life and wealth. And there's nothing Pharaoh can do about it. And so another inversion is on its way. Only Joseph, with his unique relationship to God, can help. Joseph is the immediate source of life. Pharaoh becomes an impotent bystander. Again, this isn't about Joseph and Pharaoh. It's about empire and God's promise recipient and how those two characters relate. And here's another important revelation. God is willing to create newness in life amidst death, even in the very center of Egypt, even in empire. God does not require the perfect setting with ideal circumstances in order to conjure up the healing and wholeness and life that the world seeks. The story is making the point that if it can happen in Egypt, with Pharaoh, God can do and will do God's work anywhere. And here's the last big theological point we can take from this story. The purposes of God demand a human counterpart. Brueggemann says, verse 33 presents a hinge in the story that is pivotal not only for the whole narrative, but for the whole faith of Israel. And here's that verse. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a man who is discerning and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. The situation is not unlike the solemn resolutions passed in church meetings. Whereas, be it resolved. In this text, the whereas is the fixed dream of God, which Pharaoh cannot escape. The whereas is the coming drought. So whereas there is a coming drought, the therefore be it resolved is that the proper man must be found to act in response to that coming drought, to that dream that Pharaoh can't control. Naming Joseph is an announcement that a new agenda is going to rule this land. This is the hinge of the whole narrative. It's so crazy. Pharaoh enthrones Joseph. The king enthrones an other. The king of Egypt sets a prisoner over his own empire. Like, there couldn't be a more clear proclamation that God can do anything. Because this is anything. Like, this is bonkers. This is a royal proclamation, or then there is a royal proclamation that this is happening, that Joseph is being set over the land of Egypt. An insignia of office is given, public acclamation is offered, a royal name is given, and it's all made legitimate by a marriage. This is how things would go to make a king in those days. In our own context, it would show Joseph enjoying an inauguration, a parade, and then finish with fireworks. Like that would mean he has become the leader of the empire to us. And that's what this story is trying to say. Genesis couldn't be more clear. Joseph isn't actually Pharaoh's right-hand man. Joseph is the man himself. Pharaoh makes Joseph fully Egyptian and fully in control with the power of God at his disposal. Making him fully Egyptian, maybe that's the ploy Pharaoh is trying to use to pull one over on God, like to make use of God, as though Pharaoh thinks he still has some kind of control. But the hidden way of the dream is going to outflank any power or wisdom of empire every time. And doesn't that give us hope? I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.